Welcome to Season 8 of the Creative Genius Podcast from Pearl Collective. We're kicking off 2024 with an eye-opening conversation between Pearl Collective co-founder Gail and Matt Higgins, co-founder and CEO of RSE Ventures, an investment and innovation incubation firm, as well as the author of the book Burn the Boats. In this episode, Matt Higgins will challenge you to toss your plan B overboard so that you focus on your main goal. And if that idea scares you, listen on to hear why it's critical, as well as Matt's fascinating story.
Matt, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you here. And as I've mentioned to you in our exchange back and forth on LinkedIn, your book resonated with me on so many different levels. Of course, being a female entrepreneur and understanding the difficulties that single moms have in running a business and having to deal with some of the crises that they have to deal with along the way. But I wanted to start today, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your origin story, because your story about your mom really hit me in such a deep way.
No, first of all, I remember our DM exchange, and I always say that I didn't just write a book, I engineered an outcome, and it's a multi-layered outcome, mostly to hold up a mirror to human potential. But, a few layers beneath that is to really celebrate all the strong women in my life and all the female influences that I've had from my mom to my wife, but without being preachy. Nobody wants to be lectured. Women are great. Women CEOs are amazing. So my engineering was, let me show you what that looks like. And I tried to weave that in to the book. So it's very important to reach a female audience and to commiserate about all these incredible, strong female influences that I've had in my life. So when it resonates, I feel successful because it was conscious. The whole book is dedicated to my amazing wife, Sarah. So to rewind, my origin story goes back to Queens, New York. I grew up in abject poverty, and those words always lose their meaning. So what does that mean? I grew up eating government cheese. Literally said brought. It's on my desk, actually, the box, not the cheese. It says brought to you by the USDA. And I just grew up selling flowers on street corners when I was 10, like literally, truly. The one knocking on your window to sell you flowers, just whatever it would take. And my mom got divorced from my dad when I was 9 years old, and very contentious and sad and totally dysfunctional. And she was very heavy, had a thyroid condition, and just a product of abuse, the extent to which I did not realize until much later in life. So my earliest little memories, and I don't have many, anybody who's been through a lot of early trauma can relate to this. I probably have 5 memories as a kid, but one of the earliest ones are going to college with her on Saturdays when she was picking herself up from nothing and trying to use her brain. She got a GED, didn't even have a high school diploma, and then was taking classes at Queens College. So I was sitting in the back of the room reading Beverly Cleary books and thinking like, what's my mom doing on this Saturday in this hot room in Powdermaker Hall in Queens College? So that was my context. But there was also an element of total desperation. You're a kid, when your parents struggling. My mother was very depressed, getting increasingly just trials of Job, every kind of illness, getting heavier. And, you fantasize as a little kid, maybe a man will come and step in and marry my mom. I went through that phase. And then maybe the system will give a shit, and you learn that it doesn't. So you go through these sort of stages of grief and acceptance and depression and fantasy. And then the last one, if you're lucky, is defiance. So I became very defiant when I was probably around 7th grade. Early memories are of like, I got to do something about this, and made a couple of conscious decisions. One, that I'm not going to define my narrative as being a victim. And my mother had been kind of depleted by life and felt very victimized. And it just never resonated with me when we'd have these conversations. And then 2, I got to get out. I got to do something because the cavalry's not coming, and I resent my life, and I want to be able to do my duty, help take care of my mom. I had that hero complex as a kid, but I also wanted to have my own life. And I was very much aware of the dysfunction. And so I came up with a hack inspired by my mom, which was, if you could take the GED and do well enough on the GED, you could technically convert that to a grade point average and go to any college in America. And I remember how excited, I'm getting to my burn the boats moment. I was like, this makes total sense. I'm working overnight at a deli carrying a butterfly knife so I don't get jumped. I'm not getting any sleep. I hate my life. We live in a roach motel. But if I can go ahead and I can go and get a college at 16, I can get a job making $8 an hour. instead of $3.75 at McDonald's or $5 at the deli, right? Like that was the whole hack. And yet when I told my guidance counselor, I got this great idea, everyone's response was, varying from you're going to be a loser to pity. Like this makes no sense. And it's an important point for anyone listening. When you're going through something very difficult and your whole MO is to conceal it, which most of us do when we're struggling, I was concealing the fact that I was dirt poor. I had nice jeans because with those flower money that I sold, I had the perfect little smile. I looked like a middle-class little boy, and so no one had visibility. So the advice I got from conventional wisdom was distorted by me. So keep that in mind, anyone struggling. The advice you're going to get back is distorted by your lack of candor. And then two, everyone I consulted had a vested interest in perpetuating solutions for the base case. What is the base case? At least a functional household, if not two parents, at least food on the table, enough to work with, right? So your guidance counselors, your teachers, their advice was about the base case. So when you're dealing with a happy little, white kid in America, you're like, you shouldn't drop out. You should stay the course, young man. And so the advice was about the base case, and yet I was an edge case. And I realized that it made sense to me. So my burn the boats moment came, and I'll stop talking in a second, when I finally decided, like, the only way that I'm going to go through with this radical plan is if I self-sabotage, if I give myself no ability to retreat. I don't know where this insight came from, but I was like, if I have even a little bit of a way back to restore my grades, then I may take it because of the pressure, unrelenting pressure to get me to change my mind. So I failed every single class. I went from a kid who was, seen as gifted to the land of misfit toys with all the kids wearing beepers and dealing drugs and all that, and my head down on the desk for 2 years straight until the system wrote me off. And that was my burn the boats moment when I decided to self-sabotage my education so I would go through with my conviction. I dropped out of high school at 16 years old, sat on the steps of Cardozo High School thinking they're probably all right. I'm going to be a loser for the rest of my life. But I went through with it. By the time I was, my graduated class was at their prom, I had already finished a year of college, was on the debate team, and I went from 16-year-old high school dropout to, by the time I was 26, to press secretary to the mayor of New York, $375 an hour to $105,000 a year with that one move.
That is amazing. So
Thank you.
The question that I have for you about this is, you mentioned McDonald's, and you talked about being the best gum scraper at McDonald's. And how is that indicative of your future success? I love that story, by the way.
Yeah, true story. It's interesting. I was 13 years old at the time. And I remember the first time I was given this assignment to scrape the gum under the tables at McDonald's. So if anyone out there listening, members of those party rooms, I guess they still exist, these little mushroom Mario-like characters and all that gum that was underneath. And you can imagine how it ruins your party if the mom gets gum on her dress, right? So my job was like, get on your hands and knees and clean up every single piece of gum. And at first I was humiliated because a lot of my kids would go through, all the kids at high school would go through the glass and they would see me on my knees and make fun of me wearing my little McDonald's uniform, right? But then I kind of realized, like, you know what? Nobody else wants to do this job. I was like, but if I become the best damn gun scraper there ever was, it's going to create power. Like you could feel the energy, right? Like if I kill this, it creates just a small bit of leverage in my powerless world to go ahead and impose something. And that's exactly what happened. No one cared about gum scraping, and no one cared except the guy who owned the place. That guy said, when the labor laws changed in the United States and you couldn't be paying a little 13-year-old to scrape gum for 40 hours a week, he paid me off the books, and kept me on. And then I eventually became manager of the party room. And that taught me, honestly, one of the 5 most important lessons of my entire career. And that's why I hate this idea of quiet quitting so much. The path to success is, 1, opportunity is a leading indicator. Compensation is a lagging indicator. You take the opportunity in the form of incremental work, right? Number 2, make yourself indispensable at whatever menial task you're given. And by becoming indispensable, that's going to create leverage. 3, how do you use your leverage? Most people squander their leverage by becoming whiny and annoying. Like, where's my money? Where's my money? No. Use your leverage to get a title. Use your leverage to get something that you could leverage elsewhere if you don't get what you want here. And I realized that early on. My first promotion was I wanted to be, maintenance manager of the party room. I didn't want more money. I wanted to be designated as a young kid in charge. And I followed that formula my entire career. I would always leverage my indispensable nature to get a title that if I then didn't get the compensation I wanted, I could quit. I left the mayor's office 2 times I quit. And Rudy Giuliani version 1.0, before the current incarnation, but back in the day when he was a celebrated mayor, he didn't take kindly to people quitting on him because I didn't get what I wanted. And I wanted to continue to advance. And he brought me back the 3rd time at 26 years old as press secretary. So I learned it all scraping gum at McDonald's.
That is totally amazing. So with that, I think one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading the book, and I went back and I reread it, and I take notes on books that I think the most of, which I took notes on yours.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I just was struck with was your determination, your will, and your unusual thinking, the way that you approach things. And I was wondering what you thought about the fact that having the things that you went through, the humble beginnings and all the things you went through, how much do you think that really gave you the extra edge over other people who had privilege and access to things that you didn't have access to?
Yeah, back to, first of all, thank you about the taking notes. Like, nothing more flattering as an author to hear that it has that kind of impact. I think that the upside down way in which I see the universe was born of those circumstances. And I guess the central upside down way I see the universe is we are conditioned to believe that solutions identified or hashed out give us the confidence to undertake the problem because we've identified, okay, well, I have a solution. I know how I'm going to work it out. Or I think I realized pretty early on that we have it backwards, that problems beget solutions. And if you trust your capacity to just figure it out, your infinite capacity, and that's where the whole burn the boats philosophy comes from, that you will then undertake the problem without a solution identified. And you therefore lower the bar to your own achievement. Whereas if you require yourself to identify the solution first, you will never undertake the problem because it's so hard to get to a point that you feel that confident. So it's a long way of saying there's no way in hell I would have stumbled upon that if I didn't go through a version of hell, right? Even though I don't believe you need to go through that version of hell to hear what I'm saying, to adopt it as a mindset. I don't wish that on anyone, but I don't think the version of Matt Higgins that doesn't go through that has a typical 2-family household, doesn't have a mother who's so desperate, doesn't have all that, is not sitting here right now, is not meeting with Pope Francis to private audiences at 45 or running to NFL teams. I don't say that in a self-aggrandizing way. I say it in a little bit disassociated. There's no way I get here by 46. There's no way I drop out. There's no way I get to take advantage of compounding starting at 16, right? All this professional success happened earlier because of my, circumstance. On the flip side, Dave Chang asked me this. I love Dave Chang, my partner Momofuku, but he's got this bias towards hard scrabble people who are self-made. And he goes, do you see a resume from a kid at Harvard? And you're like, hell with that. I'm looking for the kid from Queens College. And I said, absolutely not. For 2 reasons. One, going through what I went through creates a lot of dysfunction and a lot of damage that takes years and years to unravel. And it shows up professionally and personally. It would be a lie to not say that. Number 2, every single human listening to this, if they grew up in some typical scenario, dealt with their own version of pain and suffering that has shaped their life, that they've tried to overcome, some version of baggage. I think it's just as painful and hard if you have a dad that never told you I love you as it is to deal and eat government cheese. You know what I mean? So it's all relative. And so I guess, long story short, I'm not here, but for what I went through, but I don't think people have to go through what I went through to get here. That was a little bit like
really amazing how quickly you shifted your thinking, and at such a young age too. So do you think some of that came from your mom?
I think what the greatest gift my mom gave me was this bottomless belief that I had what it takes to pull things off. Now, if you're looking at it through the lens of a dysfunctional memoir about a dysfunctional parent-child relationship, you would say that's part of the heroification of a child, the parentification of a child, right? Like, it's your job to save everybody. So maybe a little bit of that, or maybe she saw something in me that legitimately made her believe you're going to figure everything out. I really don't know the answer to that question. So, but the truth of the matter is my mom believing that everything I'm going to do is always going to work out, and believe that I have a destiny in front of me that could go as high as the White House, right? Like, no matter where I ever end up, like, that was her view of me, this special little boy that did for whatever reason, it did enable me to feel like I could pull it all off. So out of all the people in the world, like, who met my decision to drop out of high school And imagine sitting on the steps of Cardozo High School. You know that feeling when you hear the blood in your ear? I'm sitting here smoking a cigarette, being like, and all I hear is a shh, like there's nobody out anymore. Now I'm allowed to be out here at 1. It's different to cut school and be out at McDonald's at 1 in the afternoon. Very different to be allowed to. You are then officially a loser, right? The one person who I can't even recall having a reaction was my mother. Just knew, makes sense, logical, you'll pull it off. And so that is a gift I talk about in the book. She gave me that.
So she really was more of a mentor in a way, in her own way, just by not telling you what to do. She allowed you to find your way.
She was like, the positive part was a mentor. The negative part is no kid should be or wants to be a parent. And so I was a parent at a very young age. And so therefore you lose that part of your development where you're me-centered. And that's a really important part for any child's development. You have to protect their ability to be selfish, because that is where the self forms. And so the downside, but we were in exigent circumstances. Like, she was truly desperate. And I don't really talk about publicly the why, but it took me some years later, and this will be in a book I write about. I recreated her history. Now that I had the resources, I literally unearthed everything that she didn't even know about herself. And I found the legacy of abuse was so profound that her ability to assume the parent role was forever distorted. And so once I had that understanding, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Because when I became a parent, I was like, I would never want my children taking care of me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is no chance in hell. And then, of course, you probably go too far the other way and insulating it from your kids, and they could feel that it's inauthentic. But the long story short is I understood how the cycle of abuse had created that dynamic. So underneath that layer of parentifying and being a parent that no kid wants, giving me the unwavering support and belief in who I could be and should be. My mother would not for an ounce be surprised by 2 NFL teams, the life I've created, like nothing about this life. And she died she died the day I became press secretary, which is, we can get into that, but she died that morning. So I was right to believe that it was a crisis, that we were on the clock. I just arrived a day late rather, because she died that morning. If it had just been a month later, we would have been able to get the healthcare. We would have been able to intervene. I would have been able to set her up in an apartment and have my own apartment. I was still living with her at 26, a grown man. So it was that faith. And so what I take away for any parent out there listening to this, and why I wrote the book partly, is like, if you're the kind of parent that when your kid tells you, hey, Mom, I want to be the next Taylor Swift, and you have an anxiety attack and you try to steer them to being a CPA, you don't need to do that. Like, they have wired into the factory settings the ability to save themselves and survive. They know what soul-crushing life they're going to settle for when they can't be Taylor Swift. But don't short circuit the attempt to be Taylor Swift, because they're going to land short of that. But it's going to be better than the soul-crushing job that you're trying to impose upon them. And that defies conventional wisdom. So my entire book, again, peeling back the layers, a big part of it is to tell folks, stop obsessing about plan B and stop inculcating in your children the belief they should obsess about plan B. So that was we're going on like a very long journey, but
I can really relate to this, because I also had to help my mother and she was very ill before she died.
I'm sorry.
And I was in my early 20s. So it was a really formative period of time. And it's very difficult to be that parent to your mother. And you don't really realize how hard it is, but you go on. You just do what you need to do.
Right. And I've tried to strike a balance with the book, and it's for another book to really get into more details. Like, I don't want to be inauthentic, because here's why. If I didn't asterisk my journey right now, like you and I just did, we were honest about the feelings it creates, how hard that is, then some kid sitting out there right now who's taking care of it, I'm making them feel even worse when they resent the role. Right? They're sitting here like, oh, maybe I'm not a good person because I hate this job. And I wish I had 2 parents who are totally self-sufficient, which is how they really feel, which is how everybody feels. And so I'm trying to like honor my mother and talk about that gift that she gave, while saying, of course I didn't want the role. Nobody wants the role. You want to evolve yourself. And so I'm glad I'm giving you the reasoning why I share about that while honoring, and so that somebody hearing this right now feels seen.
How are you raising your kids now to have that same belief that you had? And are they showing the same signs of the way you think? Did you bring that into the training with them as kids?
Well, number one, the annoying part about any parent, right, is you overcorrect. So by overcorrecting what you don't want to do to your kids, you create a new problem. So I'm creating as new problems that I'm in trying to not instill that problem, right? Like, authenticity. You have to share your emotions because then kids feel even more vulnerable when they can't figure out when you're unhappy. It's like you can't win. But I think in terms of values, I violently disagree with people who try to prosthetically install hardship onto their kids because I walked 5 miles in my day and you have to too. So I don't believe in that. I believe the way to ensure that your kids have good morals is that you don't develop an identity or self-worth based on things. Like I could care less about things, about credentials, about money as a means to make me feel good and alleviate pain and then to ameliorate suffering, right? But so I believe that no one in the family is taking on the identity around that. That work and education are the path to freedom. So everyone works, and everyone has great values. And so I am proud of that. But honestly, they were all born very intrinsically motivated. I don't think I could take a ton of credit. I think I could take a ton of credit around not distorting their trajectory, but I think their trajectory is their own. And I marvel at that. Like they were all born very intrinsically motivated with good values.
Mm. Oh, you're a good example. And one of the things that's really fun in watching and reading your book too is I think about how many people we have. Probably 86% of our listeners are female. So they're thinking about their journey, running a business and also raising kids. And raising kids is for sure the most important job they have. But in doing so, they also need to set an example for how they can be successful in life. And it's a hard balance. And you watched it with your mom. So what is some of the advice you would give to some of the female listeners?
Oh, that's a good question. Who are juggling, especially as moms and single moms? Well, I think number one thing that a kid wants to feel is that the parents have it covered. So whatever the situation is, that preserving the sense that to your child, this isn't your job. It's not your job to worry. Now, that's different about you. They can be compassionate and empathetic. You want to cultivate that, but you don't want to cultivate custody. They should not take custody of your emotions. They should not take custody of the problem. So that's my number one parental advice that I feel really strongly about. Second of all, modeling for your child that a woman can run her own business, and this is all obvious stuff, right? But it's crazy that we still have to have this discussion in 2023. But like modeling all those things is such a tremendous gift. Whether you have a daughter who then aspires higher or a young man who learns to respect and admire work and entrepreneurial spirit manifesting in his mom is amazing. So for anyone out there who is juggling, know that the gift of self-sufficiency that you are modeling for your child is more important than the time you don't spend with them, as long as you're ensuring that mom's got it covered. You know what I mean? And second of all, the values you're instilling, if you have a little girl who says, I want to be respected for my work and my creativity, or for a little man who would be like, this is the kind of woman I want to aspire to. Like my wife is the greatest force multiplier in the world, Sarah. She is the most talented human being I've ever associated with. Like, it's like humbling. I actually get such a kick out of it. In fact, it forces me to be even more incompetent in other areas because I know that she'll do it. But she's a licensed contractor, an architect. She's done all these she's amazing, but she's also my partner in business. And in any context that I'm in, Sarah's by my side. So when I teach at Harvard Business School, Sarah's in the room. She does the logistics. And when I do a TV show, Sarah's suddenly the production assistant. So my only point to all that is think about her kids are now look at that model and presumably they'll seek to emulate it. They'll never tell you, right? But like that means that hopefully, our little girl will look for somebody who will respect, the partnership, and little boy will look for somebody who is just so incredibly competent across all the different ways. So I think it's a long way of saying any women entrepreneurs are out there who are juggling and maybe feel guilty, understanding that the deposits you're making in the future self of that child will far outweigh any bit of longing that they had for more of your time is my take on it.
Well, I have a question that's maybe a little bit off this track, but I think one thing that I've noticed in the single moms is that they tend to have smaller dreams. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is dreaming bigger. And how do you help someone who doesn't have that in them or hasn't ever had that experience of really going for big dreams? How do you help them?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's a psychological issue at first. It's feeling like the die is cast, maybe. Look, I made these decisions and marriage fell apart. Now I have to take care of I'm limited. And I think that's the number one thing. There's a phrase the Italians always say, which I love: the fish rots from the head, right? If your head's not right, then you can't possibly manifest something bigger for yourself. So it begins by saying, actually, there's a great phrase: if you want something done, to give it to somebody who's busy, right? Which I found always true in business, right? That because you're a single mom, you have to refine your executive functioning skills because you have no margin for error, which makes you highly, highly competent at context toggling, right? Here's my context today. I got to show up. I got to give this presentation. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to find out, I got to take my kid to the urgent care at the end of the day because I got an ear infection that damn won't heal. You know what I mean? Like, but I got nobody to take him. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then I'll work on the PowerPoint at 9 p.m. So in my experience, I have found people who will carry more and rise to the occasion become incredibly more efficient and effective at all the executive functioning skills. And so my point is you got to reframe the journey that the compression and the pressure is an asset because it's going to make you more focused. And number two, because you don't have margin for error, you cull the herd. We have so much excess in our lives that's gratuitous. So, we don't handle social conflict well. Like, I don't want to not go to that party because I have to and be judged. When your back is against the wall and you got to take care of your kids, you're trying to build your company, like, you don't care about niceties anymore. And so it's a long way of saying, in my experience, people, especially single moms as an example, who are building businesses, are tremendously effective because they know how to manage their time better than somebody who has the luxury, of not caring. But it all begins with reframing and not feeling like the die is cast and that you can only, dream so much.
I think that's a creative pursuit as well. And I think sometimes it's just so hard to carve out that little bit of extra time to think about, what do I want? Because I think the moms are thinking about, what do I need to do for my kids? So they end up being in this service level of thinking, and they're in that pleasing level where they're wanting to take care of everyone else. And how can you make that little switch? Is there one thing that you could say that would help them really find that switch for themselves?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it begins from when you're in a position where the stakes are so high, like you're so desperate to give your kids a good life. Mm-hmm. You feel very dependent upon any tethering. So if you're tethered to a company, you feel very dependent upon that, umbilical cord, right? That if it's severed, everything's at stake. You can't feed your children. And so that's very hard. So you have to work on really believing that you're going to be okay, no matter what happens, that you are the platform. The job is not the platform. And then to those who have a dream and feel like I can't go for it because of my kids, mm-hmm. right? You're not safe at a job. In fact, the most dangerous place to stand is standing still. The most dangerous spot to occupy in your professional life is as an employee, because you are dependent upon that wire transfer every 2 weeks and the person who pushes the button. And that person, for a variety of reasons, can wake up any day and say the economy changed, or I don't like you anymore, or say somebody better, any number of reasons. And I think people don't walk around like really processing that. They always presume that the independent path, the small business, is the dangerous path. Mm-hmm. And the employee part is the safe path. And I think it's actually completely reversed. So the reason why I bring that up, if you're feeling that way and you're building your own company and you're like, oh God, this is so hard. I'm working 70 hours a week. I'm like, what am I doing it for? And like the supply chain sucks. I can't, get enough traction. I should have just stayed in that other job. Just remember, that's a fantasy and something you've constructed in your own mind. It's not safe. You're actually safe for betting on yourself. So the better thing to do is audit, like, okay, where am I weak? How do I interrupt the patterns that govern me? This is actually very important for artists, and I talk a little bit in the book about artists. Mm-hmm. Under the section where I talk about the archetypes of toxic leadership. One of the archetypes is the withholder. A withholder is the manager that knows that you are seeking approval because maybe you're a pleaser, or maybe you're just a human being and you want to know you did a job well done. And that insecure leader denies you that approval because they know it destabilizes you, and they move the goalpost on you. And so and now you in your mind may sense like, I feel like you're denying me recognition on purpose. I can't put my finger on it. And yet behind my back, you tell everyone else I'm great, but you never tell me directly. And that makes sense because I'm property, right? So you're bragging about how you have good property, and you're redistributing credit to others around me that didn't do the job, because it's all destabilizing. Why is that important to artists? Because artists do tend to be more pleasers in my experience. They don't like the friction of the commerce part, right? Because you want to focus on your art and you wish it wasn't even necessary. You wish you didn't have to charge. And so I'm giving you this pep talk. If this resonates with anyone out there, if you want to do better, you got to confront that impulse. Somewhere along the way, you were taught or instilled in yourself this idea that you can't advocate for you, that you're not worthy, or it's untoward, or it's unbecoming to fight for yourself. And so one of the greatest pivots you can make as an artist is don't be afraid to be like, okay, before I do any work, I'm so excited about this project. It's really great. Let's agree now so that we can focus on the fun stuff. And I find that's so hard for people to do. They're like, I'll just show that I'm doing a really good work, and then we'll talk about terms, right? And so the story of my book that I love talking about is this woman who DM'd me on Instagram, and she does these incredible car wraps. And she was saying, like, it's such a tender message. Never met her. I keep finding myself in the same situation where I'll do work for somebody and they'll go ahead, and in the end, when I'll demand payment, they won't pay me, or they'll cut me in half. They'll treat me like crap, even though my work is great, right? And I was like, well, are they happy with it? Well, they were happy until I went and got payment. And what I found was the missing piece of this story was not comfortable asserting exact terms at the beginning and sort of putting everything down. And so anyway, you asked, like, what's one piece of advice? It would be, rather than fantasize about going back to that job, focus on what it is about you that is pattern driven, that if you change the pattern, you could go ahead and change the entire trajectory of your business or your career.
Wow, that's powerful. I love that.
Thank you. I love this topic. I love the psychological stuff. Much less interested in the, this job or that job. This is where the value creation is, right? Anything psychological.
Well, and I think too that the way you're approaching this is the way you've approached it in the book too, and the stories that you shared. It just helps so much to have a path or somebody showing you there is a different path. You can be stronger. You can be assertive. You can ask for what you're worth right up front. I love the way you phrased that. That was so beautiful. And I hope that people replay this and write that down and go practice that, because that can make the difference in people in our industry being paid what they're really worth. It truly, that's gold.
It makes all the difference. And by the way, this is self-talk. Yeah. It took me a while to break this pattern. I'm like, where did this pattern come from? Like, why do I find it so uncomfortable to assert what I deserve? And then I realized, it was the interruption of that me period, where, because I was a caretaker and you always had to sublimate your needs, I never really cultivated the ability to be like, what do I want? Because by the time you're 26, you've now lost that entire chapter, right? And you're operating in a crisis all the time, doing whatever it takes to survive. And so I bet you a lot of people who, because from trauma comes art, a lot of people, have a tortured existence and never cultivated the ability to assert themselves. And big picture, for those who hear the title, Burn the Boats, it's not for me. It's a little bit of an inside joke. This phrase goes back to the beginning of recorded history. It's very bombastic. Burn the boats, it's militaristic. It's always used by male generals. The inside joke in my mind was like, I'm going to take this phrase that's imbued with all this authority that goes back to the beginning of recorded history, and I'm going to redefine what a boat is. In my mind, a boat is a metaphor for anything that beckons us to retreat in our mind. And the things that beckon us to retreat are very psychological. They're anxiety, imposter syndrome, they're shame. They're all these things that undermine our commitment. And what we really want to do is to commit. And so to give you the confidence to do that, you do have to learn how to process risk. And the whole big part of the book is about understanding when you process your plan B makes all the difference in the world. When you're pursuing your ultimate ambition, if you haven't litigated risk before you do that, it makes you look over your shoulder constantly. But before you do it, you do a simple 4-step process, it changes everything. Number one, what's the worst that's going to happen if my plan A doesn't work out? Just embrace your inner catastrophizer is what I call it, right? Because mine is very creative. It likes to imagine terrible things. I'm back in landlord-tenant court, getting evicted, eating government cheese. What's the worst that could happen? Number two, what would I do if the worst thing were to happen? Why that question is so important is we have hardwired into our factory settings deep in the amygdala, the ability to feed ourselves and survive. We already know our plan B. We don't need to devote any energy to it. And as soon as I say this question to anyone, within a second, oh, I'd go back. For me, it's hanging on my wall. It's that law degree that I hope to never have to use. Number 3, what's the probability that the worst thing's going to happen? The reason why that's so important is we're very bad at actually forecasting the bad things that do happen, and we miss the things that ultimately happen. We never anticipate them. And by putting a probability, you could be like, all right, so there's like a 1% chance that I'm going to be banished. No one will ever talk to me again. I'm going to go broke. And then 4, simple 4-step process. 4, what would I be willing to sacrifice? What would I be willing to endure? What pain would I subject myself to achieve my plan A? So for me to teach at Harvard Business School, to go ahead and finally do that thing I always dreamed of, I never got to compete at the highest level of academia, to teach at Harvard Business School, I would come within an inch of my life. Like I would sacrifice anything and endure any kind of pain. Everything I do, that is my burn the boats moment, I'm willing to bleed for right up to the edge. Compromise health, compromise sanity, compromise everything to achieve it. And so the reason why that's so important, number 4, always eclipses number 1. If you simply do that, then you can go forward with like a horse with blinders on, and you never look back. But this isn't just Matt Higgins saying it. There was a study out of Wharton in 2014 that talked about it. They tried to measure the impact of Plan B, and what they found was amazing. Merely contemplating Plan B, not even doing anything about it, does 2 things. 1, it materially diminishes the likelihood you're ever going to succeed at Plan A. And 2, it makes you much less intrinsically motivated. You just don't care as much anymore. So sequence matters. They don't use this 4-step process, but this is my addendum to the study, is that you need a process for managing risk. So I would say to anybody listening to this who's got your own design business, your own consultant, whatever it is, and if you find yourself looking over your shoulder, I bet that you didn't process the worst that could happen if it didn't work out. You didn't ask yourself what you would do about it. You didn't go through that process. And here's why it matters. Doing really, really hard, audacious things requires 110% of your focus, not 100. The energy leakage devoted to Plan B is enough to change the trajectory of your entire life. So it's so hard. My book is my accountability partner. My tattoo on my arm is my accountability partner. I need to be reminded every day, like, you committed. Like, it's done, asked and answered. But you can't do that if you haven't processed the worst case, scenario.
Wow. Well, that was a perfect ending for the podcast. Thank you.
Sorry I went in so long. I've been dying to talk to you. I've been dying to talk to your audience. Again, when everyone out there reads the book, you will see it begins with a female entrepreneur. It ends with a female entrepreneur. It's like, I really care so much in particular because I am surrounded by incredible female CEOs, and they just do a remarkable job. And here's the reason why. And I guess this is a degree of stereotyping, but I found it to be true. I just find that women leaders often over-index for self-awareness. And self-awareness is the greatest arbitrage entirely within our control. If you are self-aware, you are self-correcting. And when things aren't going well, you're willing to look within. And I just find that a lot of the incredible CEOs that I have, the common denominator is this ability to be like, let's take a step back, what's not working out. And so my book celebrates a lot of those stories. So to reach your audience in particular is amazing. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from especially female entrepreneurs has been propelling me to keep fighting for the book.
Well, I think it's going to be a life-changing read for anybody that's willing to do it. And are you the one that's doing the Audible version of this as well?
I did the Audible. Never had done that before. I asked Adam Grant, should I do the Audible? And you know what he told me? The number one regret he had when writing a book is he didn't record the first one, and he's done every one since. So yeah, my regret on the Audible, I wish I had stopped and annotated, okay, let me tell you what happened here. My next book, I'm going to do whatever I want and make my Audible also a story from the 1930s, where I bring in different casts and quotes and stuff like that.
Love it. Can't wait for it. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was so amazing to hear your story and to hear the insights. I think just even 1 or 2 of those great nuggets that you shared is going to change people's lives. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And anybody who reads it, if you would DM me and let me know what you think. I read every DM about the book. I read every comment. If you'd write a review, those reviews mean everything on Amazon. But more importantly, just if it changes, affects you, DM me, because it is grueling to push a book, and people are like, why are you working so hard on it? It's because every day I wake up to a story from somebody around the world, more women than men by far, saying the book was not the genesis, it was the catalyst to cross the threshold of commitment. They had been harboring a dream that they had been neglecting, and the book gave permission, which for me is the single most important thing I've ever done in my life. Nothing compares. No credential, nothing on the wall compares to a DM from somebody saying, I read your book and it made me commit. So that's the mission I'm on. I mean, I almost feel greedy because I want it to happen again and again and again because it makes my life feel so meaningful. So point is, if it affects you, DM me, let me know. Like you did.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on today. And thank you for caring so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you to Matt Higgins for starting off this season of the Creative Genius podcast with a highly thought-provoking conversation. With so many nuggets of wisdom presented in this episode, hopefully you take at least one thing away to think further on. Tune in next week for the next episode of this season of the podcast. And be sure to follow Pearl Collective on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for the latest updates about this podcast and more.